Welcome to Mafia Stories. Where are you listening from? Comment below and let the story begin. Fire me after you read page 47. Abigail Bennett's voice crossed the boardroom just as two security officers reached for her arms. 24 executives turned toward the plus-size woman standing beside a ruined coffee tray, her white blouse stained brown and her cheeks burning beneath their stares. At the far end of the polished table, Dominic Moretti did not move. He was 6 feet 4 inches of quiet authority in a charcoal suit, with broad shoulders, tattooed hands, and dark ink rising above his collar. A smaller design marked the edge of his cheekbone. He had dismissed 6 female secretaries in 3 months, and everyone in Moretti Tower knew his rule. No woman worked directly for him. Abigail had lasted 43 seconds. She had not even been scheduled to attend the meeting. A staffing manager had sent her upstairs by mistake, then announced in front of the room that she was the temporary replacement. One director had looked at Abigail's body, smirked, and said, "At least this one won't be a distraction." A few people laughed. Abigail had forced a smile because rent was due Friday, her younger sister's tuition payment was late, and dignity did not cover an overdue mortgage. Then her heel caught the projector cord. The coffee flew. A $200 million merger agreement disappeared beneath a dark wave. "Remove her," Dominic had said, not loudly, but the room obeyed. Abigail dropped to her knees and gathered the pages before the liquid reached the signatures. Her fingers shook as she separated the sheets. That was when she noticed it. Page 47 felt different. The paper was thinner. The print sat slightly higher than the rest. Even the page number leaned a fraction to the left. She had spent years correcting contracts for attorneys who never remembered her name. She knew what careless copying looked like. This was not careless. It was deliberate. Dominic's gaze settled on her. "What did you say?" Abigail stood, holding the wet document against her chest. The incapacity clause was replaced. "This page gives the other company control if you miss 2 board meetings. It also lets their doctors decide whether you're fit to lead." The mocking director leaned back. "She spilled coffee and became a lawyer?" Abigail looked at him. "No. I spilled coffee and saved you from signing a trap." No one laughed this time. Dominic extended one tattooed hand. She crossed the room and gave him the page. He compared it with the surrounding sheets, then lifted it toward the window. The watermark was missing. A muscle tightened near his jaw. He closed the folder and turned the lock on the boardroom door. "Phone's on the table," he said. Chairs shifted. Expensive watches flashed beneath the lights. One by one, the executives surrendered their devices. Dominic's attention returned to Abigail's temporary badge. He read her last name twice. "Bennett." Something colder than anger entered his eyes. "Your mother worked for my family." Abigail's breath caught. Dominic placed page 47 between them. 9 years ago, Eleanor Bennett warned us about the same kind of fraud. Abigail stared at Dominic as though the floor had shifted beneath her shoes. "My mother warned your family?" she asked. "She was accused of stealing from you." Dominic slid page 47 into a clear evidence sleeve and handed the remaining contract to Miles Reed, his head of security. "The meeting is over," he told the executives. Nobody argued. Within a minute, the room emptied, leaving Abigail alone with Dominic, Miles, and the faint smell of spilled coffee. Dominic walked to the window overlooking downtown Chicago. "Eleanor Bennett worked in our accounting department for 11 years. 9 years ago, she reported irregular transfers. 2 weeks later, $4 million disappeared, and every record pointed to her." Abigail folded her arms to keep her hands still. She said the records had been changed. Nobody believed her. "Did you?" Dominic turned. His face offered no easy answer. "I was not in charge then." That was not the same as no, and Abigail noticed. Miles placed a thin personnel file on the table. Her name was printed across the front. "You knew who I was before today," she said. Dominic did not deny it. He gave her 72 hours as his temporary secretary. If she made one serious mistake, entered a restricted area, or shared anything she saw, she would leave immediately. Abigail almost laughed. "You have fired 6 women in 3 months, and I am supposed to feel encouraged by 3 days? You were supposed to feel employed." Rent was due Friday. Grace's nursing school payment was already late. Abigail lifted her chin. "I accept." Her first morning began at 6:30 with 27 messages for schedule changes and a security phone that looked older than she was. While ordering lunch, she pressed the wrong extension and reached a man waiting for instructions from Miles. "Turkey or tuna?" Abigail asked. The line went quiet. "Ma'am, for lunch, unless the mysterious assignment includes fasting." Across the office, Miles covered his mouth with one hand. Dominic kept reading, but the corner of his mouth shifted before he lowered his eyes. By noon, Abigail had reorganized the calendar, corrected 2 duplicate appointments, and found 3 meetings listed under companies that did not exist. One address belonged to a building demolished 5 years earlier. She carried the schedule into Dominic's office and placed it beside his hand. "Either your calendar is haunted, or someone expected you to go somewhere that is not there." Dominic examined the entries, then canceled the afternoon meeting without explanation. Before Abigail left that evening, he set a new encrypted phone on her desk. No praise, no smile, just trust measured in ounces. From the hallway, Miles watched her enter the elevator. "You kept her because she found the false clause?" Dominic closed Abigail's file. Inside was a photograph of Eleanor Bennett standing beside his father. "No," he said. "I kept her because I knew exactly who she was before she entered this building." By the second morning, Abigail had learned that working for Dominic Moretti required 3 things: perfect timing, a strong memory, and the ability to pretend that men in expensive suits were discussing shipping delays instead of secrets. She arrived before sunrise with 2 coffees, one for herself and one for Dominic. She placed his cup beside his files, then froze when Miles glanced at the label. "You ordered him vanilla?" Abigail looked toward Dominic's closed office. The barista asked if he wanted room for cream. I panicked. Miles stared at her for a long second. "He drinks it black. Then today he grows as a person." Dominic stepped through the doorway in time to hear her. He examined the cup, took one careful sip, and returned it to the desk without comment. Abigail decided that not being fired counted as approval. The hours moved quickly. She repaired the copier after 3 managers had declared it broken, found a missing invoice beneath a stack of restaurant menus, and accidentally sent a meeting reminder to every senior advisor with the words, "Please stop glaring at the printer." Dominic read the message on his phone, lifted his eyes toward the office machines, and watched 3 nervous men turn away at once. "Efficient," he said. Abigail could not tell whether he meant the reminder or the fear it created. By lunch, she had discovered another problem. A private meeting had appeared on Dominic's schedule for the following evening. No organizer was listed. The address led to an empty warehouse near the river, and the calendar invitation had been created from inside Moretti Tower. She carried the tablet into Dominic's office. Someone added this after midnight. Dominic studied the screen while Miles checked the access record. "Only 4 people can edit that calendar," Miles said. Abigail felt Dominic's attention settle on her. She was one of the 4. Before she could defend herself, Victor Moretti entered without knocking. He was older than Dominic, polished and calm, with silver beginning at his temples. His smile seemed friendly until it reached his eyes. "You must be Eleanor Bennett's daughter." Abigail straightened. "You knew my mother?" Everyone knew her after the accusation. Victor adjusted one cuff. "This family has a way of turning curious employees into cautionary stories." Dominic's chair moved back an inch. Victor noticed, but continued. "Take the salary. Finish your 3 days. Then leave before you discover something that cannot be forgotten." Abigail waited for Dominic to challenge him, but he only watched Victor walk out. That night, long after the offices emptied, she returned to the financial records floor. Her mother's file contained missing years, altered dates, and a reference number linked to the false meeting. Abigail used her temporary access card and entered the archive room at 1:13 in the morning. She did not see the security camera above the door. At 7 the next day, Miles placed the recording in front of Dominic. The screen showed Abigail slipping inside alone. When she arrived for work, her desk was empty and the archive door stood open. Dominic waited in the darkness beyond it, holding her mother's file. "You have one chance," he said. "Tell me what you were looking for." Abigail closed the archive door behind her and faced Dominic across the dim room. The file in his hand looked painfully small for something that had shaped nearly a decade of her life. "I came here because my mother died with everyone believing she was a thief," she said. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "I needed to know whether she lied to me or whether your family lied to the world." Dominic placed the folder on a steel table. "You could have asked. Would you have answered?" His gaze held hers, and the pause between them became its own reply. Abigail stepped closer. The records showed that Eleanor Bennett had reported unusual transfers months before the missing money appeared. Several pages had been removed, and the remaining dates did not match the banking logs. Abigail pointed to a reference number repeated beside 3 payments. It also appeared in the invitation to the false meeting. Someone used the same internal account for both, she said. Whoever framed my mother may still have access. Miles entered with Victor behind him. Victor studied the open file, then turned toward Dominic. Her access should be revoked immediately. She found a connection our auditors missed, Dominic replied. She also entered a restricted room after midnight. Victor's tone remained measured. That is not courage. That is a liability. Abigail expected Dominic to dismiss her. Instead, he picked up her temporary badge and replaced it with a new card. Restricted access, he told her. You work under Miles until I decide otherwise. Victor's polite expression tightened at the edges. You are changing rules for a woman who admitted deceiving you. Dominic slid the file into a locked case. I am correcting an oversight. Abigail followed Miles back upstairs, unsure whether she had been protected or placed under closer watch. Near noon, Dominic asked her to accompany him to a meeting across town. The underground garage smelled of concrete and cold rain. His black sedan waited beneath a row of fluorescent lights. Abigail was reaching for the rear door when she noticed a thin puddle beneath the front wheel. Is that supposed to be there? She asked. Miles crouched beside the tire, then stood quickly. Nobody gets in. Dominic moved Abigail several steps away without touching her, placing himself between her and the vehicle. His face did not change, but every person in the garage became alert. A mechanic arrived and examined the car. Someone had tampered with a critical line, and the damage had been hidden carefully enough to pass a quick inspection. The meeting address had been false. The calendar had been altered. Now the car had been compromised. These were not separate warnings. They were parts of the same plan. Miles checked the security station and returned carrying a plastic access card found near the service entrance. The photograph showed a woman with dark hair and a composed smile. Dominic took the card from him. For the first time since Abigail had met him, his control appeared to fracture. The name printed beneath the photograph was Celeste Warren. Abigail looked from the card to his face. Who is she? Dominic closed his hand around it. Before he could answer, Abigail's secure phone began to ring. The number was hidden. She raised it to her ear, and a woman whispered, Abigail Bennett, if you want the truth about your mother, do not trust the wrong Moretti. The call ended before Abigail could ask a single question. She lowered the phone, but Dominic had already read the answer in her face. A woman knew my name, she said. She told me not to trust the wrong Moretti. Miles reached for the device and began tracing the number. Dominic studied the access card in his palm. Celeste. Warren was my private secretary, he said. She also planned to become my wife. Abigail waited. He gave her nothing else. No explanation for the pain hidden behind his careful tone. No reason a missing woman still possessed access to his building. The number bounced through 6 states, Miles reported. Whoever called knew how to disappear. Dominic ordered the garage sealed, then moved Abigail to a secure floor beneath his penthouse. She objected until she noticed that he had already arranged for Grace to receive a discreet security escort at nursing school. You had no right to involve my sister, Abigail said. Someone used your mother to reach my family, Dominic replied. I will not let them use Grace to reach you. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed a new key card on the counter and walked away, leaving no room for gratitude or argument. The safe suite was larger than Abigail's apartment and somehow less comfortable. She found clean clothes in her size, pain reliever for the scrape on her palm, and a paper bag containing the cinnamon crackers she kept in her desk. Dominic had noticed more than she realized. Later, she found him in the private kitchen, speaking quietly with an older custodian named Mr. Alvarez. The man's wife needed surgery, and their insurance had refused part of the claim. Dominic signed a payment authorization, folded it once, and handed it over without asking for thanks. He turned and discovered Abigail near the doorway. You were not supposed to see that. You should try being less mysterious. It would save everyone time. His eyes rested on her scraped hand. He opened a cabinet, removed a first aid kit, and motioned toward a chair. Abigail sat before she could invent a reason not to. His tattooed fingers handled the bandage with surprising care. "You keep medical supplies in your kitchen?" she asked. "People cut themselves cooking." "Do you cook?" "No." "Then this cabinet has been waiting its entire life for me." A quiet breath left him, almost a laugh. The sound changed the room. For one brief moment, Dominic Moretti did not look like a man guarding an empire. He looked tired, human, and dangerously easy to trust. The following morning, Abigail carried 2 folders into his private elevator. Dominic joined her as the doors closed. "No vanilla coffee today?" he asked. "Personal growth cannot be rushed." The elevator descended 3 floors, shuddered, then stopped so sharply that the folders slipped from her arms. The lights vanished. Abigail pressed herself against the wall as the air seemed to narrow around her. Dominic reached for the emergency panel, but it remained dark. A metallic groan sounded above them. He turned toward her and placed her hand over the steady beat beneath his shirt. "Follow the rhythm," he said. The elevator dropped several feet. The elevator lurched, and Abigail's knees gave way. Dominic caught her before she reached the floor. One arm braced around her shoulders while the other held the emergency rail. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Somewhere above them, metal scraped against metal, then stopped. "Look at me," he said. Abigail tried, but the dark walls seemed to move closer with every breath. "I cannot breathe." "You can. Your body is lying to you." He guided her palm back to his chest. "Count with me." She followed the steady rhythm beneath her hand, though her fingers shook against the fabric. "This is officially the worst elevator music I have ever heard," she whispered. "There is no music. That is what makes it so bad." His breath changed, almost amused, and the small sound gave her something real to hold on to. Dominic removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. He kept speaking, not about danger or rescue, but about ordinary things. The lake after sunrise. The bakery 2 blocks from the tower. The terrible vanilla coffee he had finished after she left the room. "You drank all of it." "I was raised not to waste food." "That may be the first normal thing I have learned about you." Emergency lights flickered on, painting the elevator in a weak red glow. Dominic pressed the call button again. This time Miles answered through the speaker. "We have you." The backup brake engaged between the 28th and 29th floors. "Do not move toward the doors." Abigail stared at the narrow seam ahead of them. "I was not planning to." "Explore." 20 minutes later, a rescue crew opened the ceiling hatch and lowered a ladder. Dominic insisted Abigail climb first. When she reached the 29th floor, her legs nearly folded, but Miles caught her elbow and led her away from the shaft. Dominic emerged moments later, his shirt dusty, his attention already fixed on the maintenance chief. The inspection took less than an hour. The control system had been altered by someone with executive access. Only 3 active credentials could reach that level: Dominic's, Victor's, and Miles's. Abigail looked at each man differently after hearing that. Back in Dominic's office, she placed his jacket on the chair. "You knew who I was from the beginning," she said. "You said that much. You never said why you kept me." Dominic opened a locked drawer and removed a copied document. "I needed to know whether you came here looking for justice or revenge." The answer struck harder than the elevator drop. "So I was a test. At first. And now." His eyes moved to the faint red marks left on her palm from gripping the rail. "Now someone is trying to frighten you away." He slid the document across the desk. It was her mother's termination order. Eleanor Bennett's signature appeared at the bottom, but another name rested above it in darker ink. Anthony Moretti, Dominic's father. A note in the margin authorized the destruction of the original accounting records. Abigail read it twice before the words became clear. Your father knew she was innocent. Dominic stood beside the window, his reflection broken by the city lights. I believe he helped make her guilty. Abigail lifted her gaze from the page. Then your father was protecting someone. Dominic's phone illuminated on the desk. A message had arrived from Victor. Bring Abigail to the Russo Gala tomorrow night. She knows more than she realizes. The Russo Gala filled the ballroom of the Langham with crystal light, white roses, and the soft music of a string quartet. Abigail stood beside Dominic near the entrance, trying not to tug at the dark blue dress Grace had helped her choose. It fit her exactly as she was, which felt more frightening than hiding beneath. Something loose. Dominic glanced at her hands. You are pulling at the fabric. I am negotiating with it. Are you losing? The dress has strong legal representation. A faint warmth touched his eyes before he offered his arm. Abigail hesitated, then rested her hand against his sleeve. Every conversation around them seemed to pause as they entered. Men who had ignored her at Moretti Tower suddenly studied her. Women in designer gowns measured her from shoes to hair with polished smiles. Abigail kept her shoulders level. She had spent years making herself smaller in crowded rooms. Tonight, she refused. Victor approached with a champagne glass and greeted them as though his message had not sounded like a warning. "You came. You told me Abigail knew something," Dominic said. Victor looked at her. Sometimes people remember more when they return to the right place. Before she could question him, an elegant woman in silver stepped between them. Elena Russo was the daughter of the family hosting the gala and the public face of the merger Dominic had nearly signed. Her smile landed on Abigail without kindness. "Dominic, I did not realize temporary staff were included tonight." Abigail opened her mouth, but Dominic answered first. "She is here with me." Elena tilted her head. "Of course. It is generous of you to give everyone a chance to feel important." Several guests nearby pretended not to listen. Heat climbed Abigail's neck, yet she met Elena's gaze. "That is kind of you to say. I was worried the tiny appetizers were the only generous thing in the room." A man beside Elena coughed into his glass. Dominic lowered his eyes, hiding a brief smile. Elena's expression sharpened. "You should be careful. Rooms like this remember when someone does not belong." Dominic set down his drink. He removed the folded agreement from inside his jacket, tore it cleanly down the center, and placed both pieces on the silver tray of a passing server. "Then this room can remember that the Moretti and Russo partnership ended tonight." Elena's confidence vanished. "You would destroy a $200 million agreement over an insult?" "No," Dominic said. "I ended it because you showed me the character behind the numbers." Outside on the terrace, Abigail faced the Chicago River as cold air cooled her cheeks. "I did not need you to rescue me." Dominic joined her at the railing. "I know. Then why did you do that?" "Because disrespect becomes policy when powerful people pretend not to hear it." The music drifted through the glass doors. Abigail looked at him, and the space between them narrowed. His hand moved toward hers, stopping just before their fingers touched. A woman's voice came from the shadows behind a stone column. "Dominic." He turned so quickly that Abigail felt the change in him before she saw the stranger. A dark-haired woman stepped into the terrace light, pale and exhausted, clutching a small flash drive. Dominic stared at her as though the past had walked out of a grave. "Celeste." She looked from him to Abigail. "I did not betray Luca because I wanted to," she said. "Victor ordered everything." Dominic did not reach for the flash drive. He looked at Celeste as if one wrong movement might erase the 3 years between them. Abigail stayed beside him, close enough to feel the tension in his shoulders. "You gave them Luca's schedule," Dominic said. Celeste's fingers tightened around the small device. "Victor had my younger brother. He promised to release him if I cooperated." "Did he?" Her eyes dropped. That was answer enough. Dominic turned toward the river, one hand resting against the stone railing. He did not raise his voice or demand sympathy from the woman who had broken his trust. The restraint made the moment heavier. "I sent Luca a warning," Celeste continued. "Victor intercepted it. Afterward, he made certain everyone believed I had acted alone." Abigail watched Dominic's jaw shift, then become still. "Why come back now?" he asked. Celeste held out the drive. "Because Victor is preparing to sell control of the company to the Russos." The agreement Abigail found was only the first step. Dominic finally accepted it. Inside the ballroom, the quartet stopped in the middle of a song. Miles appeared at the terrace doors and spoke quietly into Dominic's ear. The gala's security system had detected an unauthorized access attempt near the service elevators. Dominic guided Abigail and Celeste through a private corridor before the guests understood anything was wrong. They reached a locked lounge on the hotel's upper floor, where Miles connected the drive to an isolated computer. Rows of financial transfers filled the screen. Abigail moved closer. Her mother's employee number appeared beside dozens of transactions, but one date made her stop. "This payment happened 6 months after my mother died." Celeste looked at her. Victor kept using Eleanor's identity because the system still recognized her credentials. Abigail scrolled through the files. The same approval pattern repeated for years. Her mother had not stolen money. Someone had turned her name into a mask. An alarm sounded in the hallway. The lights flickered, and the computer shut down before Miles could copy everything. A window near the far wall cracked under sudden pressure from the building's emergency shutters. Abigail flinched as a loose fragment cut through Dominic's sleeve. He moved her behind him, more concerned with checking her face and hands than his own arm. Miles secured the room, while Celeste recovered the drive. 15 minutes later, they reached a private residence owned by Dominic near the lake. His injury was shallow, but the physician was delayed by the security lockdown. Abigail found a medical kit and cleaned the cut herself. "You are staring," Dominic said. "I am deciding whether you are going to complain." "I do not complain. You have criticized my coffee, my schedule, and my handwriting. Those were observations." Her smile faded when she saw how tired he looked. She tied the bandage, and her hand remained near his wrist. Dominic turned his palm beneath hers. The gesture was quiet, almost uncertain. "I do not know how to trust without waiting for the cost," he said. Abigail met his eyes. "Then stop deciding the ending before people get a chance to stay." He leaned closer, giving her time to move away. She did not. Their kiss was brief and careful, more promise than surrender. When they separated, Miles entered carrying the restored files. "You need to see this." He placed the laptop before them. Every transfer required 2 approvals. One belonged to Victor. The other belonged to Dominic Moretti. Abigail stared at Dominic's name on the screen until the letters blurred. He stood beside her without reaching for the laptop, as though touching it might make the accusation more real. "Tell me you did not approve those transfers," she said. Dominic looked at the dates instead of her. "I did not." Celeste folded her arms. "The system says otherwise." "Systems can lie," Abigail replied. "Dates usually do not." She pulled the laptop closer and compared the first approval with Dominic's archive calendar. On the morning his signature appeared, he had been admitted to Northwestern Memorial Hospital after the attack that took Luca's life. A second record showed he remained there for 11 days. Abigail searched the metadata and found that Dominic's credentials had been activated from Moretti Tower while he was still under medical supervision. "Someone used your emergency access," she said. Miles checked the authorization history. Only Victor had permission to activate those credentials during Dominic's absence. Celeste sank into a chair, relief and shame crossing her face at once. Dominic remained near the window, but his hand loosened at his side. Abigail closed the laptop. "You were framed the same way my mother was." "Then Victor has been building this for years," Dominic said. "And he believes we still do not see the full design." By sunrise, the evidence had been copied and delivered to Dominic's attorneys. Celeste entered protective custody under a private security agreement, and Miles began tracing Victor's accounts. Before Abigail left the room, Dominic stopped her. "You believed me before the evidence cleared my name." She adjusted the sleeve of her borrowed sweater. "I believed the man who protected a custodian's wife when nobody was watching." The following afternoon, Dominic called every senior employee into the main conference room. Abigail expected another private assignment. Instead, he placed a new identification card before her. Chief of Staff was printed beneath her name. "She will control my schedule, review every contract, and report directly to me," he told the room. Several faces tightened. Dominic noticed them all. "Anyone who questions her authority may bring the question to me." Nobody spoke. Abigail looked at the card. "This is a dramatic promotion for someone who once ordered vanilla coffee. You survived the consequences." That evening, the penthouse kitchen filled with smoke when Abigail forgot the wrapper beneath a frozen waffle. The alarm sounded, and 3 guards entered at once. Dominic appeared behind them, took in the toaster, the smoke, and Abigail waving a dish towel beneath the censer. "Should I assume breakfast has become hostile?" he asked. It rejected diplomacy. He dismissed the guards, opened a window, and pressed a quiet kiss to her forehead. For a few seconds, their lives felt almost ordinary. Then the elevator doors opened. Federal agents entered with a warrant, led by Special Agent Dana Cole. She placed a signed cooperation agreement on the counter. Abigail recognized her own signature. Dominic read the first page, then looked at her across the smoke-filled kitchen. "Miss Bennett contacted us 6 months ago," Agent Cole said. "She has been assisting our investigation ever since." Dominic did not raise his voice. That made his question harder to bear. "Did you bring the federal government into my home?" Abigail could not say no. Abigail stood across from Dominic while federal agents searched the penthouse, opening drawers and photographing files that had once been protected by his name alone. I contacted Agent Cole before I applied for the job, she said. I wanted the records that could clear my mother. Dominic placed the cooperation agreement on the counter with careful precision. You signed this 6 months ago. I agreed to identify financial accounts connected to Eleanor Bennett. I did not know they would lead to you. Agent Cole approached, but Dominic stopped her with a glance. This conversation is not yours. She studied him, then stepped away. Abigail moved closer, though every instinct told her to keep her distance. I never gave them your private schedule. I never told them where you lived. When I realized innocent employees could lose everything, I negotiated protections for them. You negotiated my life without telling me. His voice remained low, but his hand closed around the edge of the counter. I was afraid you would send me away before I found the truth. So you decided deception was safer than trust. Abigail had no defense that did not sound like another excuse. Dominic looked toward the window, where morning light spread across Chicago without warming the room. Celeste lied because Victor threatened her family. You lied because you believed I would choose my empire over your mother. Would you have chosen differently when we met? His eyes returned to hers. The answer stayed between them. A federal agent carried a sealed box toward the elevator. Dominic stepped aside, then opened a hidden compartment beneath the kitchen island. He removed a passport, a set of car keys, and an envelope of cash. He placed them in front of Abigail. There is a safe apartment in Milwaukee. Miles will take you there. She stared at the items. You think I betrayed you, and you are still helping me? Victor knows you found the transfers. The federal search will tell him you are no longer protected by secrecy. Dominic, I am not leaving while you face this alone. That is not your decision. You made me chief of staff yesterday. Decisions are part of the job. Something almost softened in his face, but it vanished when her secure phone vibrated. The message came from Grace's number. It contained a photograph of her sister sitting in an unfamiliar office, frightened but unharmed. Beneath it were 6 words. Bring the drive. Tell Dominic nothing. Abigail locked the screen before anyone could see. Her heartbeat filled her ears. I need a few minutes, she said. Dominic watched her too closely. What happened? Nothing. Grace is worried about the search. The lie tasted worse than the first one. She carried the passport and keys into the guest room, then wrote a note on hotel stationery. You taught me that protection is an action. This one is mine. She left through the service exit while the agents cataloged the penthouse. By the time Dominic found the note, Abigail's tracking signal had disappeared. Near an abandoned printing plant on the south side. Miles checked the location and went pale. That building belonged to your father. Dominic folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. It is where Eleanor Bennett signed her confession. The printing plant smelled of dust, old ink, and rain leaking through a cracked roof. Abigail entered the main room, carrying Celeste's flash drive in one hand. Grace sat near a silent press, frightened but unharmed, while Victor stood several feet away in a dark overcoat. You came alone, he said. That was the instruction. Abigail kept her eyes on her sister. Let her leave. Victor gave a tired smile. You still believe this is about cruelty. It is about survival. He placed a folder on a metal table between them. Inside were federal notices, frozen account projections, and lists of employees connected to Moretti businesses. When the investigation becomes public, banks will close every account bearing Dominic's name. Thousands of people will lose their jobs. Families who have never broken a law will lose health insurance, homes, and pensions. So you framed my mother to protect them? Abigail asked. Your mother discovered that Anthony Moretti had been sharing financial records with federal agents. If that truth had surfaced, the organization would have collapsed years ago. Eleanor became the explanation everyone was willing to believe. Abigail's throat tightened, but she did not look away. You ruined an innocent woman because it was convenient. I made one terrible choice to prevent 100 worse ones. Victor's voice remained controlled, yet exhaustion showed around his eyes. Luca wanted to dismantle everything. Dominic began listening to him. The Russo merger was the last chance to preserve the legitimate companies before the government reached them. And when Luca refused, Victor glanced toward the dark windows. I forced a decision. Celeste was supposed to delay him, not destroy him. Plans change when frightened people make mistakes. He was not asking forgiveness. He was asking Abigail to admit that every clean answer carried a hidden cost. She slipped one hand into her coat pocket and touched the Small recorder Miles had placed there days earlier. Victor noticed the movement. Take it out. Abigail slowly set the device on the table. He pressed a button, heard the recording indicator, and removed its memory card. You came for a confession. I came for Grace. Then choose her. He placed a heavy metal stamp beside the recorder. Destroy the card, and your sister walks out. Keep the evidence, and she stays while the federal government decides whether your mother's reputation matters more than a living person. Grace shook her head. Abby, do not do it. Abigail looked at the memory card, then at the sister she had protected since childhood. For years, she had believed clearing Eleanor's name would repair everything. Now the truth demanded another person as payment. She brought the stamp down once. The card cracked beneath it. Victor released a breath and motioned for Grace to stand. Before she could cross the room, the large entrance door opened. Dominic walked inside alone. No guards followed him. His hands were empty, and his attention went first to Abigail, checking that she was standing. Then he looked at Victor. Let them go, Dominic said. Victor studied him with disbelief. You came without protection. Dominic stepped farther into the room. You wanted a Moretti. His gaze never left Abigail's face. I am here. Victor placed a transfer agreement on the table and pushed a pen toward Dominic. Sign control of every Moretti company to the Russo Group, and the women leave. Dominic glanced at Abigail and Grace before reading the first page. You built this choice carefully, he said. You always believed people would protect what they owned. Victor's mouth tightened. That is because they do. Dominic closed the document. Then you never understood Luca. He set the pen down. Or me. Victor stepped closer. Without this merger, federal investigators will freeze the accounts. Employees will lose everything. You will destroy thousands of lives to satisfy your conscience. No, Dominic replied. I will separate the legal businesses, surrender the criminal accounts, and protect every innocent employee with the reserve fund you never found. 4. The first time, Victor lost his practiced calm. There is no reserve fund. Abigail looked at Dominic. He had created another plan without telling anyone. There is now, he said, and it belongs to the workers, not the family. Victor turned toward Abigail. The recording is gone. Celeste Drive means nothing without a witness who can explain it. Abigail reached into her pocket and removed the secure phone Dominic had given her during her first week. You taught me something useful, she told Victor. People who think they are the smartest person in the room rarely check the calendar. His eyes narrowed. Abigail had memorized the approval codes from the financial records and scheduled an encrypted copy to reach Agent Cole at midnight unless she canceled it herself. She also included the hotel files, the altered contracts, and Eleanor Bennett's employment records. The broken memory card had never been their only chance. A distant siren rose beyond the factory walls. Victor looked toward the windows, then back at her. You planned this before you came inside. I am a secretary, Abigail said. Planning ahead is the job. Grace moved toward her sister, but an old security system suddenly activated. Heavy doors began closing across the room, and one of the abandoned printing machines started with a deep mechanical groan. Victor had prepared an emergency lockdown, but the neglected building could not handle the power demand. Lights flashed. Ceiling panels shook loose. Dominic crossed the room and pulled Abigail and Grace beneath a reinforced doorway as plaster and rusted fixtures fell nearby. Miles and federal agents entered through the loading entrance moments later. Victor did not resist when Agent Cole placed him under arrest. He only stared at Dominic with bitter disappointment. You traded an empire for people who will forget your name. Dominic kept one arm around Abigail. Then they will finally be free of it. A sharp crack sounded overhead. Dominic turned, pushed Abigail farther beneath the doorway, and took the impact of a falling beam against his shoulder and side. The rescue crew lifted it quickly, but he did not stand. Abigail dropped beside him and pressed both hands around his. Stay with me, she said, repeating the words he had once used in the elevator. His fingers closed weakly around hers as paramedics carried him outside. Inside the ambulance, his eyes found her face, then slowly closed before the doors shut. Dominic survived the night, though the doctors warned that recovery would take months. Abigail stayed beside him through every test, every sleepless hour, and every morning when pride made him reach for work before his body was ready. She never treated him like a fragile man. She simply moved the files out of reach and replaced them with breakfast. You are abusing your authority, he told her one morning. I am chief of staff, she replied. Abuse comes with excellent benefits. His mouth curved, and the guarded distance in his eyes softened again. 18 months later, the Moretti name carried a different weight. Victor was convicted of fraud, coercion, obstruction, and conspiracy. Celeste entered federal protection after giving full testimony and helping identify the accounts she had once been forced to manage. The Russo merger collapsed, and the legal Moretti companies remained open under independent oversight. No innocent employee lost a pension, health plan, or paycheck. Dominic surrendered control of every criminal account and accepted the legal consequences tied to the empire he inherited. He did not ask Abigail to excuse the past. He spent each day building something that no longer required excuses. Eleanor Bennett's record was officially cleared on a bright October morning. Abigail stood outside the courthouse with Grace on one side and Dominic on the other as a clerk handed her the signed order. For several seconds, she could not speak. She pressed the document against her heart, and Grace began to cry first. Dominic said nothing. He placed his hand against the center of Abigail's back and remained there while reporters called her name. That afternoon, a new bronze sign appeared in the lobby of Moretti Tower. Eleanor Bennett Legal Defense Fund. Abigail now directed the fund, helping workers challenge false accusations and protecting families who could not afford powerful attorneys. Her office was not outside Dominic's door. It stood directly across from his, equal in size, with the same view of the Chicago River. She still misplaced pens, talked too quickly when nervous, and once sent a confidential meeting invitation with a smiling waffle image attached. She no longer apologized for taking up space. One evening, Dominic asked her to come into the boardroom where they had first met. The room was empty except for a single folder resting on the polished table. Abigail opened it and found the original merger contract, carefully restored. Page 47 had been framed inside the cover. A small velvet box rested beneath it. Dominic stood across from her, his sleeves rolled back from his tattooed forearms. You told me to read the page before I fired you, he said. Abigail looked at the ring, then at him. Technically, you never completed my hiring paperwork. He moved around the table and lowered himself to one knee. Then let me correct the record. Her laughter broke through the tears she had been trying to hold back. Is this a permanent position? Lifetime contract. No hidden clauses. She said yes before he could offer another careful sentence. Months later, during their wedding reception, Grace reminded everyone that Dominic once refused to employ a female secretary. Abigail lifted her glass and smiled at the man beside her. He was not wrong about one thing, she said. I was never meant to stand behind him. Dominic reached for her hand. No, he answered. You were meant to stand beside me. And for the first time in his life, the man who had built every rule around fear chose a future that required none.